Most people will never know this, but somewhere in the shadows of global finance, $200 trillion is moving without oversight. Money so vast it dwarfs the GDP of every country combined. Your savings, your investments, your future. They exist under the shadow of a system you were never meant to see. This is still happening today, and it isn't illegal. It's hidden in plain sight. The rules that govern your bank account, your mortgage, even your retirement, are nothing compared to the forces operating in the shadows. Most people will never know this, because the mainstream narrative only celebrates banks, interest rates, and headlines about Wall Street profits. They never tell you how the real money is controlled, how it bypasses regulations, and how it can move billions without ever being reported. Shadow banking is invisible to regulators, invisible to the press, and invisible to you. Here is what they done. T want you to see the same institutions you trust with your savings are deeply entangled in a system designed to operate outside the law, outside accountability, and outside public knowledge. The history of shadow banking begins in the 1970s. At that time, traditional banks were tightly regulated, their lending and investments monitored by governments. But money is opportunistic. When regulations tighten, it seeks the gaps, the blind spots. Investment funds, hedge funds, and special purpose vehicles began to operate in parallel to the banking system. Most people will never know this, but the seeds of a hidden $200 trillion empire were planted decades ago. This is still happening today, and the evolution has been relentless. By the 1980s, financial deregulation in the United States and the United Kingdom allowed institutions to create increasingly complex instruments, mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, off-balance sheet vehicles. These instruments were legal, yet designed to mask risk and profit in ways traditional banking could not. Most people will never know this, but every financial crisis since then, from 1987 to 2008, was amplified by the hidden leverage of shadow banking. This is still happening today, and the lessons learned from these crises only strengthen the system, making it more secretive, more powerful, and more profitable. In the 1990s, shadow banking evolved further. Special purpose entities allowed banks to move massive amounts of debt off their balance sheets. Hedge funds began leveraging trillions in assets with minimal transparency. Most people will never know this, but derivatives, swaps, and complex financial contracts became weapons of wealth accumulation, invisible to the public, hidden from regulators, and controlled by the few. This is still happening today, and these structures have only grown more sophisticated with time. The 2007-2008 financial crisis was the first time the world glimpsed the scale of shadow banking. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and other giants were caught holding billions in off-balance sheet debt. When the market turned, the consequences were catastrophic. Most people will never know this, but the $200 trillion in hidden financial power didn't vanish. It shifted, adapted, and diversified. Hedge funds, private equity firms, and central counterparties quietly absorbed the risk, often with taxpayer guarantees. This is still happening today, and the institutions behind these transactions grew larger, more opaque, and nearly untouchable. China's entry into global finance added another layer of complexity. In the 2010s, Chinese banks and state-owned enterprises began creating shadow lending networks worth trillions. Loans were extended without collateral, disguised through off-balance sheet structures, and routed through Hong Kong and Singapore entities. Most people will never know this, but the shadow banking system is global. Every continent, every currency, every major economy is connected in a web that regulators cannot fully penetrate. This is still happening today, and each transaction leaves a trail only the initiated can trace. Technology accelerated the system further. Digital transactions, automated trading, and blockchain-based instruments have allowed money to move faster, further, and more invisibly than ever before. Most people will never know this, but trillions circulate in milliseconds, invisible to auditors and invisible to governments. Hedge funds now operate with artificial intelligence, predicting markets, leveraging unseen capital, and profiting from opportunities you cannot even perceive. This is still happening today, and the speed of shadow banking has become a weapon, a tool to dominate traditional finance entirely. Let's examine some undeniable examples. The 2008 crisis revealed $60 trillion in hidden derivatives, largely unregulated. In 2019, The IMF reported that global shadow banking assets had reached $52 trillion. Then came private equity. The largest funds now control assets exceeding $10 trillion. Much of it invested through opaque vehicles that regulators cannot fully access. Most people will never know this, but these numbers aren't abstract. They represent the financial muscle shaping governments, companies, and markets worldwide. This is still happening today, and the pace of accumulation has only accelerated. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the depth of reliance on shadow banking. Central banks injected liquidity directly into markets, buying corporate debt and ETFs in unprecedented scale. Shadow banking institutions became the conduit, allowing trillions to flow while evading public scrutiny. Most people will never know this, but the hidden system cushioned the elite from losses, while ordinary citizens faced unemployment, eviction, and debt. This is still happening today, and every crisis strengthens the secretive network. Even more striking is the role of non-bank financial institutions. Insurance companies, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds participate in shadow banking by investing in complex derivatives or structured products. Most people will never know this, but your retirement savings may indirectly feed into the same mechanisms that drive global inequality. This is still happening today, and the system has grown so vast that nearly every corner of the financial world touches it in some way. By 2025, shadow banking assets are projected to exceed $200 trillion. Global debt has surged to $300 trillion. Regulators are over. Laws designed to constrain shadow banking have not only failed, they have been quietly eroded. In 2025, the Financial Stability Board reported that unregulated credit markets had grown faster than traditional banking by 20% in a single year. Most people will never know this, but the shadow system is preparing for an era of unprecedented leverage. This is still happening today, and 2026 will mark a pivotal moment as hidden liquidity could influence elections, markets, and corporate dominance on a global scale. The question is not if you will be affected, but when. The $200 trillion in shadow assets allows elites to manipulate markets, inflate valuations, and engineer crises. Most people will never know this, but wealth and power are concentrated to an extent unseen in history. This is still happening today, and the ordinary investor has no idea the rules are not applied equally. Who wins? Banks, hedge funds, private equity, multinational corporations, and the ultra-wealthy who can navigate this hidden system. Who loses? Retail investors, pensioners, and anyone who relies solely on traditional banks and markets. Most people will never know this, but the consequences of a $200 trillion shadow banking empire are profound. Wealth consolidation, economic inequality, and the invisibility of risk until it becomes catastrophic. This is still happening today, and the next decade will reveal the full extent of control. By 2027, the shadow banking system may dominate lending for corporations and governments alike. Interest rates, asset prices, and even currencies will be shaped not by central banks alone, but by hidden networks controlling leverage, derivatives, and liquidity. Most people will never know this, but the financial elite are positioning to profit from every crash, every panic, every systemic failure. This is still happening today, and those unprepared will be swept aside. Even ordinary consumers feel the impact indirectly. Credit cards, mortgages, and personal loans may seem ordinary, but they are influenced by the risk appetite and liquidity of shadow banking networks. Most people will never know this, but your personal debt is connected to a global system that few truly understand. This is still happening today, and ignoring it leaves you vulnerable when the next crisis hits. The warning is simple. Understand the system, track where your money goes, and question the institutions you trust. Shadow banking is not hypothetical, it's operational, it's global, and it's nearly impossible to escape. Most people will never know this, but knowledge is your only defense. This is still happening today, and ignoring it will leave you exposed when the next systemic shock arrives. If this video woke you up, drop a like and subscribe. New forbidden truth every single day. Turn on notifications to next one might save your wealth. Comment the one thing you're doing right now to prepare. I read every single one.